hello.
Yes, hello. Looking nice as usual.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. To do something about the light here.
I was just looking at the script from Philippe, and he had said 7:30 in his script.
He probably thought 17:30, not 7:30. Ah, there's our guest. Hello, Professor.
Hello, Tanya. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Great, great.
You look as elegant as always, both of you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Made a little effort there.
I don't think you have to make much of an effort.
Oh, yes, we do.
Hang on a second. I'm going to close my door here.
Okay,
Sure.
no problem.
It's pitch dark outside all of a sudden, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder what happened to. I'm surprised that Philippe is not here yet.
Well, maybe he has a technical problem, or maybe
Should I try to call him? Let me try to call him.
No, wait, it's still 12 minutes. Maybe he will. He will.
We said that we would be here 15 minutes early.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you want to call him?
Yeah, I'll try to call him. Yeah.
Otherwise, you will have to moderate, Linda. That's it is as it is.
How's the weather in Zurich?
Actually, today we had a very nice day. It was sunny and cloudy.
You're trying to connect.
Weather.
Okay, what's the problem? It's open. It's open. Okay.
What's the weather in Philadelphia?
It's been rainy and humid.
Okay.
Cool.
Yes. Okay. Because
Today the sun.
Okay, the three of us are already here waiting.
We have this tropical storm hurricane that hitting the coast today or tomorrow in New Orleans, and it's going to bring rain by the end of the week here.
I see.
We've had record number of storms.
Here is Philippe Nell connecting.
There he is.
Yes. Okay, I can now unmute Linda again. Linda, I muted you. You have to unmute.
Okay. Unmuted. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Hello.
Hello, Philippe.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very well. Very well.
So before everybody else gets on, Joe, you have to tell us who's going to win the elections.
Yeah.
I actually know the answer to that, but I'm not revealing it until after the vote.
Oh, that's how it goes. You know the answer already. Well, how interesting is that?
No, I was just yes.
You know, everybody, the turnout is so huge right now of people voting by mail or in person. It's almost twice as large as the last election.
Really?
And that is an indication of more Democrats voting, because Republicans tend not to vote that way. They tend to go to the polls. So there's an indication that, and people are interviewed generally, and it's overwhelmingly Democratic. So it could mean that, you know, the vote's getting out there, and Trump is in trouble.
I just want to make you aware that the first participants are starting to join. So whatever you say now, you know, you can't take back, really.
Okay.
Are they not muted?
Yes, they are muted.
Okay, but some can read lips, right?
Maybe, yes. Well, they can hear us.
They can hear us. We just can't hear
okay, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's
they
true.
can see and hear us.
So maybe
Yeah.
I'll mute myself, then I won't get into trouble.
No, I don't think anyone's getting into trouble. We haven't had that kind of a problem yet.
I will tell you that I don't have a hard stop in an hour, but I can't go too far beyond maybe an hour and 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, this is fine.
Then I've got a bunch of students waiting to meet with me, and supposed to be at 1. I told them maybe 1:15, 1:20.
No, at the latest 1:15 we are done. It should be 1:10.
Okay,
So
that's good.
Speaking of students, I don't know if Dr. Nell told you, Professor Westphal, he's teaching at the university in Asunción, Paraguay. And
Really?
I could see that some of your students, Philippe, have also registered for this webinar.
Ah, very good.
So,
yes, this is nice. We have no class today, because of a webinar. So
Yeah.
we have a free afternoon.
free
Yes.
afternoon. Oh, I'm sure you gave them a lot of homework.
Yeah. Tomorrow we have a midterm exam, but I have seen that quite a few told me they were going to register because they were interested, by the topic we are going to discuss. And we are talking macroeconomics in the class and trade policy. So this afternoon too, we'll have some elements which will refer to that.
Yeah. I'm assuming, of course, you do the class from Zurich.
Yes, online.
And
Yes.
it's in English or in Spanish?
English. It's in English online. Yes.
That's very good.
Three students. It's a good class and quite dynamic. We already had the first quiz, and then we have oral presentations to make also in the coming weeks. They're going to have to identify some macroeconomic variables in Latin America and impact of COVID-19 and so on. So it's a very interesting period now to study macroeconomics because of the situation.
This is a really tough time, and it's it's going to be tough from now on in all of Latin America. Very tough.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I read the last report now also of the Economic Commission for Latin America, which just came up in October for Economic Outlook 2020, where they publish every year in October. And indeed, they point to a very, very complex and difficult situation now coming up.
Yeah.
Will you be able to make a comment, or is it too early on the elections in Chile?
Yeah, I can say a few words about it.
Yes, because it looks like it's now. What I was just reading is that what was surprising that so few people voted.
Right.
50% of the people.
I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can answer the question as to why. I haven't. I was talking to some friends, actually, in both in the military and in government yesterday there about it very briefly, and I didn't ask them about that as to why the turnout, whether it was a bad day, inconvenient, or it's interesting. I think it was about 50% of the electorate turned out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably a lot, yeah. Although somebody once told me a sign of a mature democracy is that you may abstain from voting. I don't know if I like that too much. I think it's
that's true. Then we are a very, very outstanding democracy in the United States because a lot of people abstain here.
Actually, I read this afternoon in what was it, Microsoft News, an online article that the Latinos will make it happen for whoever wins the election in the US. The Latinos in Arizona and other states where they are in
Florida also.
Florida.
Yeah, they're becoming a force, themselves, and there's a difference between the Florida Latinos and the Southwest Latinos too, in terms of their origin and their politics. So, and I don't think either campaign has spent a lot of time on that vote, in my view.
Mm. Okay, slightly over 2 minutes to go, and then we can start if you agree.
Yes.
Philippe, I have oh, he left.
He's coming back.
Great.
We need him.
Yes.
I have a daughter that Linda knows very well, my youngest daughter, and her husband, who's she's a nurse by profession. He's a doctor, an MD, and he did a fellowship a year in Zurich at the University Hospital there. So they lived in Zurich for a year.
Excellent.
Yeah. The only thing she didn't like
What he
about
was doing,
Zurich was it
quite
was too
amazing.
expensive.
Liver transplants.
Yeah.
Liver transplants.
Well, wonderful. A nice experience to be in Zurich. Very good.
Yeah, no, they liked it very much, and we visited them. As I said, the only thing they didn't like about it was very expensive.
Yes, it is. No, it is. In particular, with the dollar at 90 cents Swiss franc, it is expensive. Also for us, you know, it is quite expensive. Trains and many things. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
But you get a nice landscape, you know, and you get a very nice thing to discover, and outdoors are wonderful.
It is beautiful. It is beautiful.
Yes, we are very fortunate, you know, to have such a beautiful environment.
Yeah.
And we treasure it every day.
Yeah. That's why you're always neutral, so nobody can take it from you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We need to have everybody with us.
Yeah, we guard it very jealously. Okay, now all the participants who joined, they have been privy of this conversation, pre-webinar conversation. It's almost the hour. Would you agree we start on time?
Yes.
Okay, it's the hour. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Tatiana Gaspar. I'm the Managing Director of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce in Switzerland. This webinar, entitled US Presidential Elections, What is at Stake for Latin America, is very timely as we are precisely 1 week away from US Election Day. Our guest speaker has had an outstanding academic career and served in multiple high positions of government and diplomacy. Dear viewers in Switzerland and across the Atlantic, it's a great honor for LATCAM to introduce and welcome very warmly Professor Joseph Westphal.
Thank you.
It's also a big pleasure for me to welcome a familiar face, Honorary Ambassador of LATCAM, Dr. Philippe Nell, who has prepared in-depth this webinar as usual and will be the moderator today. Great to have you with us again, Philippe.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's thanks to our friend and LATCAM board member, Linda Walker, that the connection to Professor Westphal was made in the first place. Therefore, it's only natural that Linda will address a few personal words of her own, just following. Before we start, I would like to make our viewers aware that we are recording this session. The recording will be posted on our website for those who want to view it later. The formal part will last for about 45 minutes, after which we will have time for a few questions. Please submit them in writing under Q&A. If you worry about privacy, you can do this anonymously. Now I'm handing over to you, Linda.
It is an honor and great pleasure to introduce Dr. Joseph Westphal, who has kindly agreed to speak to us on the ramifications of the US elections on Latin America. First of all, thank you, Joe, for agreeing to have a conversation with Dr. Philippe Nell on this topic for the Chamber, exactly as Tatiana already mentioned, exactly 1 week before the elections. We all can't wait. Joe and I met originally in La Paz, Bolivia, over 30 years ago, and have been friends ever since. We met and went together to the Altiplano and Lake Titicaca. Joe at the time was working for the US Congress and working with the State Department on a project with the embassy, and I was working for Citibank. Joe has an amazing background, not only in government. He worked in the US House of Representatives and Senate for about 12 years and worked in administrations of 5 US presidents: Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. He also was in academia, where he was the chancellor of the University of Maine, among other positions. Prior to joining as senior global fellow and Chan Sun professor at the Lauder Institute, Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, he was the US ambassador to Saudi Arabia from March 2014 to January 2017. We can say that Joe is a true Latino, since he was born in Santiago and is bilingual. He came very young with his family to the US. He is also a non-resident fellow at the Center for International Studies of the Catholic University of Chile. A large part of his career was spent dedicated to issues in Latin America, having traveled throughout the whole continent. Thank you again, Joe, for joining us. I turn over now to Dr. Philippe Nell, who will direct the discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tatiana and Linda, for your kind introductions. I'd also like to thank Professor Westphal for joining us tonight to discuss the various aspects of the US presidential elections with a focus on Latin America. For Latin America, next week's elections, like every US presidential election, represents major stakes. Over the years, the US have developed a policy addressing its interests as well as its concerns referring to economic, political, security, and humanitarian issues. As a background for our discussion, let me highlight just very quickly 8 points. First, economic ties are strong. The United States is a major trading partner and source of foreign investment for many countries in Latin America. The United States has also concluded free trade agreements with 11 countries in Latin America. Second, the Western Hemisphere is a large source of US immigration, both legal and illegal. Migration are mainly driven by proximity and economic and security conditions. Remittances from workers to their families account in some Latin American countries, particularly Central America, Caribbean, for more than 10% of gross domestic product. Third, curbing the flow of illicit drugs from Latin America and the Caribbean has been a key component of US relations with the region for decades. Fourth, US policy efforts have supported democracy promotion, including support for strengthening civil society and promoting human rights and the rule of law. Fifth, US aid, and this is very important, US aid to Latin America and the Caribbean will amount this year to $1.7 billion. The US contribution has been quite stable since 2017, with, however, a small increase now this year in 2020. And six, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic is having widespread economic, social, and political effects in Latin America. As of October 19, the region had 10.4 million cases. This is 26% of the world, and over 379,000 deaths. This is over 34% based on the world. Brazil, Mexico, and Peru were among the 10 countries worldwide with the highest numbers of deaths. 7, the IMF forecast from this month projects an 8% economic contraction for the year in Latin America. According to a July this year UN report, as a result of a pandemic, 45 million people are likely to move into poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean this year. And finally, 8, under the Trump administration, US relations with Latin America and the Caribbean generally have moved toward a more confrontational approach, especially regarding efforts to curb irregular immigration from the region compared with the approach of past administrations. However, the global framework did not change. We have seen total US aid. The global framework reflects continuity with long-standing regional US policy priorities. But it appears at odds with the administration, sometimes positions with various countries on trade, immigration, and foreign aid. According to Gallup poll and Pew Research Center polls, negative views of US leadership in the region have increased markedly during the Trump administration. President Trump visited only Argentina in 2018 for a G20 meeting, while President Obama, during his 2 terms, visited 12 countries, including 5 visits to Mexico during his 2 terms of president. So this gives us little background in order now to move into these US presidential elections and the focus on Latin America. And I would propose you to start with Mexico, because every country has specificities in the region, and the US-Mexico relations are by far the most important for the United States in Latin America. Over the past 4 years, however, there have been some tensions, which everybody has heard about, referring to the construction of the wall, referring to illegal immigration, the renegotiation of NAFTA, which has not been easy, and also US protectionist measures, particularly on steel and aluminum. Security issues in Mexico and the drugs trade have further exacerbated the situation. Overall, Mexico succeeded in concluding the new NAFTA, despite the fact that certain conditions are less favorable than the preceding agreement. Mexico succeeded by not paying the wall, and also, but Mexico remains the largest. For Mexico, the United States remains the largest market, and Mexico has kept and will be keeping for a long time a strong dependence on the United States for exports, investment, and remittances. This being said, I would appreciate to hear from you, Professor Westphal, your overall assessment of the US-Mexico relationship.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nell. And you know what? I think it would be nice, if you don't mind, I'm going to be less formal, more informal, and I'm going to address you as Philippe, and if you could address me as Joseph, we'll go by first names, it'll be easier.
Thank
we
you.
already know each other, so we don't have to be so formal. Let me say a couple of things in general before I get into specific Mexico. I thought your assessment was right on and very accurate. But a couple of things that I think will frame the discussion for all the countries that we are probably going to talk about. This election for us, and as you can tell from my engagement in American politics, at least since Jimmy Carter, is the most significant election in 2 ways. First, it's so unique in that we have 2 candidates that are absolutely, totally different from each other, not just in personality and background, but also in their view of the world, and their view of their jobs, and the view of how to lead the American portfolio to the future. They present for us in the US, and I think for the rest of the world, a very interesting set of decisions, because within each of the 2 candidates, there are things that may have very positive elements, and others that we may feel are not so positive. So I want to begin by just saying that what President Trump brings to the table and has been made very clear is his view of the role of the United States around the world. And the best way to highlight that is in his first speech to the United Nations General Assembly back in 2017, right after his election, for the 72nd session of the General Assembly, he said the following. He said, "Our success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty to promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and for the world." And here's the key. We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government. But we do expect all nations to uphold these core sovereign duties, to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation. This is the beautiful vision of this institution, and this is the foundation for cooperation and success. Strong sovereign nations let diverse countries with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect. What he's basically saying in that speech is that it's the America first, that he's saying to countries, you should treat your country first. You should do what you need to do for your country. That should be your priority, and we shouldn't interfere in that, nor should any other countries. We should respect country sovereignty, and you need to respect our sovereignty. So contrast that with Joe Biden, who recently said, by the time President Obama and I left the White House, we had established a new foundation of cooperation for our region, for the region of the Americas, built around shared responsibility, respect, and partnership. It included a broader and deeper relationship with Mexico, a global agenda for cooperation with Brazil, reinvigorated engagements with Central America, post-earthquake reconstruction in Haiti, restored diplomatic ties with Cuba, support for Colombia's historic peace process, improved energy security in the Caribbean, expanded trade and collaborative relations with countries throughout the region. It was President Obama and Vice President Biden who believed that if you have a virus in one corner of the world or an act of terrorism in another, as two examples, if we don't work together multilaterally to address these issues where they begin and control them, they will come to our door. It's how they approached issues in the Middle East. It's how they approached the issues with respect to China and in Europe and in Latin America. And that's a very different vision than what President Trump brings to the table. So as we go forward, one wonders how these two, whichever one gets elected, will do. I think I would say in general that Vice President Biden, and of course I know him very well because I worked for him, I don't think that his ideas that I just read will differ much. President Trump, on the other hand, is more difficult to predict because even though we can look at what he's done in the last several years in a few countries, and what he has not done, we now enter a situation where he's no longer running for re-election if he gets elected, and he's now free to do what he wants. And the next goal for him is really his legacy. Mm-hmm. That is, how am I going to be seen as president? So there may be some adjustments to the way he views the world around him, given that particular factor. Now, to your point about Mexico, the relationship with Mexico has always been very, very, very strained. I remember when I worked for President Clinton and I was the head of the Army Corps of Engineers and I was Assistant Secretary of the Army, I was trying to do some work with Mexico on infrastructure, working maybe to do some connecting between our ports, our military training, all kinds of things like that. And they were absolutely no. We don't want anything to do with the U.S. military because of that history that goes way back to the time when we stole half of their territory, that are now the states of Arizona and California and so on. So that has changed. The relationship has gotten much better, less tense, less dramatic as it used to be. But we've had a very tough history over the years. And the United States has been very abusive over long periods of time, not only when they took territory, but when the way in which they treated what would then become Mexican Americans by taking basically all their property. So there's a long and troubled history between our countries. President Obama did travel there, but his visits were limited, short, not the kind of visits that really gained the confidence and the trust of people. I always said, not to him directly, but to some of his, to his chief of staff and others, that I thought he should spend more time there. Vice President Biden, on the other hand, you mentioned that President Trump did one trip to South America, and that was to Argentina for the G20. That's absolutely right. President Biden, of course, this is in 8 years during the Obama administration, he did 16 trips to South America and many, many to Central America. So there's a very big difference in the way they approach the region. Now, surprisingly, the new president of Mexico, AMLO, has developed a pretty nice relationship with President Trump and has agreed to support some of the policy ideas of Trump. One that involves Mexico really preventing these irregular immigration patterns from coming into the United States by using US dollars to help keep them in Mexico, train them, and house them in Mexico, which has really reduced by almost 150,000 the number of immigrants coming in since that agreement was made. So and his visit to the United States was, I think, very successful. They had a good meeting, made a number of agreements. So I think they're starting, and they're both populists. So even though ideologically they may be worlds apart, from a personal standpoint, they're very compatible.
Yes, thank you very much for this appreciation on the U.S.-Mexican relations. I think for myself, and I think for the audience, your recollection of the history behind this tie, which usually when you read an IMF report or when you read statements, usually we don't go back to that. But I think it's important to point to this in order to better really assess and feel our relations today and where they can go tomorrow. And you also presented very well the very different personalities between Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden, also in view of their priorities, in view of how they see the world, sovereignty versus partnership and collaboration and cooperation. Referring to a second term from President Trump, in Switzerland we have also some politicians who had been very strong on their views for sovereignty, particular, yes, for Swiss sovereignty, despite the fact that one of them who has been a leader of his political party, has also been a minister, was also a businessman, very successful businessman, very, very successful. But now he just turned 80 and he has kept his views. Now, his view has not changed. He's kept his views. And my inclination would be that Mr. Trump has convictions. And he does what he believes must be done. When he started his office, he had a list of maybe 40 things he wanted to do, and he checkmarked each thing which will be done. And he went after this list, and many people thought that the list would change once you are elected. You see, okay, now I am in, and I'm not going to please all the little ones I want going to please, and I'm going to find my good middle way. But no, he just went checking one after another one and keeping on his line. And I believe this is why the election is so important. This is why also you have so many people in the United States going to vote, because it's important for the United States. For the American people, although Mr. Trump put America first, and the American people want America to do well, they want America to be able to bring them the good living standards and to improve them consistently. At the same time, America is the most powerful military power in the world, and also economic power and political power, so that this election is so important for the rest of the world, and in particular Latin America, because it is the next door of the United States. And therefore, if we look, for instance, at the new NAFTA, the US-Mexico-Canadian agreement, it has been analyzed and so on and so forth. And the conclusion is that finally, its aim, the way it has been renegotiated, is to increase, for instance, for automobile, the content of North American content in a car, moving from 62.5% to 75%. Well, you can do it. But at the end of the day, are you going still to be competitive against other producers in the world? So that there's been big doubt expressed on that. And also the policies on steel and aluminum, the hikes in tariffs, 10% aluminum, 25% for steel, they are still on right now. What has amazed me is that the US-Canada-Mexican agreement could be concluded, but these tariffs hikes still remained at the time of signature and conclusion. So this shows also the enormous economic power of the United States toward its neighbors, Canada and also Mexico. Therefore, we'll see what happens with the election. But these tariff hikes, some with China has been recognized by the WTO as violating the WTO. The ones on aluminum and steel will anyhow violate the WTO. So I believe that for Mexico and for Canada, a regime which respects the rule of law is what we would like to see. Is what we fight for. It's what we defend at a multilateral level, and also then for Mexico. But one element which I noted also in the American system, which I found also very good to point, is that Congress also plays quite a significant role in policy making. For instance, for aid to Latin America and Caribbean, Congress has shaped quite significantly the proposal of the White House to come to the 1.7 billion, for instance. And also the court system in the United States, the Supreme Court just came up, I think this month, with a decision referring to one of the administration's policy, which was on the deferred action for childhood arrivals, for these children that arrive in the United States before being 18 years old, and the Trump policies has been now fully turned down, so that there is a checks and balance working. But at the same time, a sovereignty policy is a policy which, in my opinion, is a policy which looks at your own interest, and by doing that, you may, as we have seen in this administration, with immigration, for instance, come to some decisions which have very, very significant consequences on the people who are migrating.
Right. Well, I would say, first of all, that President Trump is likely to, your point about his meeting all his list of commitments is true. He made a number of campaign promises when he was running for office. And after he was elected, he kept putting a check by all the things that he had accomplished and kept saying, I made this campaign promise, I'm going to keep it. And that's what made him very attractive to a large sector of people in the United States, that he was the first politician who actually did deliver on many of these promises, when sometimes it's very hard to do. I do think that every administration, every president changes somewhat in the second term for a lot of reasons. One is legacy, as I mentioned. Another is that the government of the president will change. The people that have been with him from the very beginning, a lot of them will leave, and a new team comes in. And sometimes that team is different, just shapes different, has different policy interests, and kind of moves the administration in a different direction. With respect to Mexico, we have about 37 million Hispanics of Mexican descent in the United States. It's a formidable group and growing every day. It's about 63% of all Hispanics are of Mexican descent. And since about the year 2000, that number has increased by almost 76%. So we see a huge increase in the number of Hispanics of Mexican origin in the United States. The pandemic and some of the immigration restrictions have slowed that down, but I don't think it's going to stop it. I think the need for workers, the need for the movement of people across borders, trade, and business investment are going to require our borders to continue to be pretty fluid over the years after you can get a hold of this pandemic. So I think, as you said, Mexico is our a major trading partner of the United States. This NAFTA agreement will have its positives and will have potentially its negatives. As to the WTO, to President Trump, the WTO, if it doesn't go along with what he wants, he'll simply withdraw. And he's threatened to do that. And he has threatened to withdraw from the World Health Organization and other such organizations. So those words that I read that he gave to the UN, he meant, we're
Yes.
going to work in what's our best interest, and we're not going to budge on the basis of what a world body thinks we ought to be doing.
Now, referring to WTO, the United States has played a leadership role for many, many years. I have been sitting in many committees of WTO for a couple of decades, and I was always impressed by how well the US delegation was prepared, about the arguments they had, and also how they contributed to a negotiation. For instance, the accession of China to the WTO, the US was instrumental in having a much stronger and a much stronger commitments on the side of China. Some came from US Congress, but some also then from the US administration. And therefore, we really need the US at the WTO.
Yeah, so Joe Biden would very likely, of course, support and continue to work with WTO.
Yes.
He has a very different approach to China. It doesn't mean that he doesn't agree with Trump that China has done some bad things, stealing intellectual property, for example, among others. But he feels it's important to work with them. It's important to negotiate. They are a huge world economic power. You can't just ignore them. So there'll be differences between Biden, but Trump doesn't necessarily need to adhere to the WTO if he decides not to.
Yes, we understand. But it will be our role to keep the United States in the WTO because it's important for the institution to have, with all the agreements we are managing through the WTO. Now, this being said,
But
perhaps,
let me mention something concerning what you just said. One of the things about this election that's very interesting is that there is a, the Trump supporters and even people who may not maybe 100% supporting him on everything, but who believe in a lot of his message. It's a sizable, almost 50% of the American people, 40 to 45%. They really believe that this country and the president is no longer should be the leader of the free world, that we should no longer be responsible for foreign aid and for worrying about what this leader in one country is doing to his people, human rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They don't believe that. They think that that is a weight on the United States that is not necessary. And when they interview people who support President Trump in that regard, a lot of them say that. So that is something that those people who still look at the United States as a world leader and as a mover and shaker in the multinational liberal world order, under a Trump presidency, that may be difficult. Now, Biden has said he wants to return to that liberal world order. He wants to have multinational focus on things. But I've heard from many European leaders, and you can tell me whether this is true or not, that they're saying, particularly in the European Parliament and some leaders in Europe are saying, after what's happened in the last 4 years, it's too late. The United States, we've moved on. We don't need the United States, and we don't necessarily think the United States is that we must depend on it the same way. Do you think that that's true?
No, I think the United States remain, in particular, if you look at the economic part on business, the US market is extremely attractive. It's a big market. Companies who can enter the market have excellent opportunities. The United States has been a locomotive of the world economy for a number of years. Still now, they run twin deficits, which pull forward the world economy.
No, but that means that the United States, no. So trade and commerce and investment would continue, and that's be very strong. What they're saying is that in terms of organizations like NATO, the WTO, even the UN, and other such things, we're not necessarily reliant on the United States anymore. That coalition that brought the world together, the European world together after World War II, is disintegrating.
Yes, the coalition has changed. This is quite clear. At the WTO, on the Euro round, once you had the European Union and the United States agreeing on the agricultural package, then we could conclude it. Now, at the WTO, if you want to conclude something, you don't need the US and the EU, but you need also to have Brazil, India, and also China together. And this is why the reforms do not have any perspectives for the future at the WTO. So it is clear, in order to give new directions to some organizations now, we have moved into a new era. This is quite clear. So what we're doing, we are pretty much managing the basis that we have created.
Now, going back to Latin America, I think that the United States, regardless of who is president, come the beginning of next year, certainly the end of this year, beginning of next year, some people are looking at some of the things that are going on in Latin America or have been going on in the last 6 months or more is tantamount. They've begun to call it the Latin Spring instead of the Arab Spring.
Mhm.
Things, for example, the situation in Chile, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Colombia, etc. That combined with the pandemic and the other issues that have brought these countries to have these very deep internal divisions on income inequality, on et cetera, are going to be daunting. I was looking at a report. You're probably much more familiar with me than this because you're an economist, so you know more about this. But the GDP is expected to fall 8.5% in Argentina next year, 7% in Brazil, 6% in Chile, 5% in Colombia, 8.5% in Mexico, and 12% in Peru. That's really deep cuts in GDP for these countries. And then combined with the effects of the pandemic, as well as any recovery efforts, and the United States being consumed with its own pandemic issues and its own economy literally shutting down, is going to make things very difficult. Don't you agree?
Yes, I agree. Reforms which should have been taken when times were still fairly good for Latin America. There was a commodity boom between 2003 and 2010. And during that boom, reforms, meaning education and health, which are key to productivity and to the well-being of a society. And now what is being called for are the same reform, but with less means. And you need financial means in order to do such reforms. Therefore, the perspectives for Latin America are not encouraging for now the coming years because of so many people falling into poverty. And the situation also for the United States is no more easier because the pressure of migration will continue to be there, even increase because of the lack of opportunities for the people in Latin America. And we have seen in some countries in Latin America also where the parliaments would function in such a way that could not really permit the countries to come forward. So this is situation that we have now, and the first thing will be to go over the pandemic. This will still going to take some time. And for the United States, who has Latin America in its backyard, therefore, it's going to be very important for the upcoming administration to devise a policy that enables to mitigate as much as possible these very negative effects. The US already made some efforts this year since COVID came up in Latin America. Important funding, $140 million went down to Latin America in order to help on health and on various actions which were necessary for these societies. But this will certainly not be enough. But looking also at Central America, we had been for some time, the point has come wherever a Marshall Plan could be useful for Central America. But Central America is not Europe. Europe, you needed to rebuild, but the skills were there. You had the society was able to pick up, provided they would get the capital in order to then develop activities. However, in Central America, a Marshall Plan will mean really to start from the basis, in order to enable these societies to increase their education level, and it takes a generation to do that.
So you're right, because President Obama invested, I forget what the amount was, I'll think of it in a minute, but during his administration, they came up with a plan that Biden promoted and went to Central America to initiate, of several millions of dollars to help what we call the Northern Triangle, which is
Mhm.
Guatemala, Honduras, and Guatemala, Honduras, and
El Salvador.
El Salvador.
Yeah.
And you know, others would argue that we spent that money, but it didn't amount to anything. I mean, it didn't really restore the confidence of people. There wasn't economic growth. Outmigration was huge. Corruption was endemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Vice President Biden has already said in the campaign that he's going to do, he doesn't call it a Marshall Plan, but he calls it an investment in Central America of significance, that it is important for our national security and our national interest to do this. But he hasn't developed the details of that plan as to how exactly it's going to go. And President Trump is not detailed anything of that nature. He's merely looking at how he can manage the control of those immigration patterns that have been operating for quite a long time. The drug issue still persistent and still a problem for Central America. So it's going to be a daunting challenge for the Western Hemisphere as well, including Canada. We have another thing, you know, as somebody who was an ambassador to a really big country, and this is a good country. I mean, a good example. I was ambassador to Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Our embassy was one of the largest in the world. I had almost 1,000 people working in the U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia. We were engaged in every aspect of our bilateral relationship. Everything: education, healthcare, obviously counterterrorism. Well, you name it, we were involved with them and working very closely with them. Why? Because you had an embassy with great staffing, support from the president and the vice president and the secretary of state, and you had an ambassador with some seniority, because I had been the head of the U.S. Army just before that. So you had somebody who, you know, the president had confidence in, and the Saudis could see that. When you look at Latin America today, there are 8 countries that do not have an ambassador from the United States. Some of them they're all important, but some of them are, Chile, for example, doesn't have an ambassador. Bolivia doesn't have an ambassador. Canada doesn't have an ambassador. Honduras doesn't have an, Panama doesn't have an ambassador. Yeah, Cuba and Venezuela don't have ambassadors, but in the past, even with our very tough relationships, we've had ambassadors there. They may not often be in the country, but they are dealing with the issues of that situation. So Biden has made commitments that he's going to use the power of diplomacy and invest in the State Department to do a lot of the work that needs to be done in the region. That's not necessarily the philosophy of a Trump administration, who doesn't really feel that it is the role of the United States to be deeply engaged in other countries' businesses. So you see how he has managed the relationship with Brazil, the relationship with, in fact, even as you see in the news, the friendliness between him and Bolsonaro, you know, 2 chummy guys who, you know, don't believe in masks and, you know, all of this sort of stuff, right? He still has placed 2 pretty tough, what do you call them? What's the matter with me? You know, on I think it's on steel and.
Yes, tariffs, higher tariffs on steel and aluminum.
Yes. On Brazil. To which they've been very unhappy about that. But, you know, in other words, he can pat the president of Brazil in the back, but he will do whatever he thinks is in the interest of the United States, and it doesn't matter what the impact might be to Brazil. So you have 2 very different styles and 2 very different philosophies about how to approach the future. We don't even have In the State Department, in the ministry, we have, for each region of the world, we have an Assistant Secretary of State. That Assistant Secretary has a big staff, and they are continually dealing with all the issues in that region. The Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere, vacant, and has been vacant for the beginning.
Yes, I see. I think you made a very good point referring to the diplomacy between the United States now and Latin America, with so many open positions, vacant positions. I've been involved myself a lot on economic diplomacy in Latin America, and you just need to meet the people. You need to meet the people, and you need to be able to discuss the things with them. You need to be well represented, and then you're going to be able to be heard. You're going to be able to pass your messages, and step by steps, you'll understand better the other side, but also they will understand you better, and you will make some progress. Maybe we could just say a few words on Brazil and Argentina before we conclude, because I see we are going to get pretty soon the questions from the participants, from the public.
Actually, Philippe, we already have one question there. Would you like to take it right away? Or
I think we'll say a few more words on Brazil and Argentina, and then
okay, actually the question is about Argentina.
Yes, okay. Because you, Joe, you talked about Brazil, about the relationship between Brazil and the United States, in particular at the presidential level right now. And what I have seen is that Brazil, in some way, is less dependent on the US for its exports. It's only 13%. 13% of exports of Brazil go to the US. They have about 28 with China and about 20 with the European Union. So they've been able to diversify quite a bit, in particular because of their commodities. So that's a bit of a different relationship. And now for the OECD membership, President Trump was supporting both Argentina and Brazil to become OECD members. So here there was, I would say, a good dynamic which has been established.
Brazil is hugely important for a lot of reasons, obviously. The one you mentioned, in terms of their trade capacity of what they can do is immense. When I was ambassador in Saudi Arabia, years ago, the Saudis had prohibited the import of American beef because we had had a case of mad cow disease in some part of the United States. And since then, they had refused to take American beef. So they were buying beef from Brazil. And the Brazilian ambassador and I were very close friends. We still are very close friends. But I was hounding the Saudis to stop buying that lousy Brazilian beef when you can have a good American steak, And we finally got them to lift the ban at the very end. But the Brazilians were very effective in selling their products to around the world, including China and other places. Much better than the Argentinians in this regard, much more effective for some reason. But Brazil is important for a lot of the reasons. Biden, for example, has identified Brazil as a place and a country that he really wants to work with the leadership on the issue of climate. And he believes that we need to be really engaged with Bolsonaro, even if we don't agree with a lot of his thinking, because they are an important country and because they have such a huge impact on the world's climate and on our futures, let alone trade and economics. From a strategic standpoint, they're also regionally an important source of regional security for the region. They have, of course, a large part of the Atlantic. They're an important country for us to have a good relationship in that regard. And it's interesting when you mentioned early on about the Monroe Doctrine, the doctrine that said, from President Monroe, one of our earliest presidents, who basically told you, Philippe, you Europeans, you these countries have already gotten their independence from you, so stay away. This is the region, you're not to meddle in the affairs of these countries. And we will be deeply insulted if you do. It was a speech he gave to Congress and became the Monroe Doctrine.
Yes, yes.
Well, we didn't, we said you couldn't get involved, but we certainly got involved in wars and in bringing down governments and, you know, supporting military governments and so on. We didn't hesitate from doing that. And the result was that we lost some confidence there. And now, first you have Secretary Kerry under President Obama saying the Monroe Doctrine is over. We don't need that doctrine anymore. We need the world to be involved here. But then under Trump, when the Russians start getting involved in Venezuela, Bolton says, no, Monroe Doctrine comes back. We don't want the Russians and the Europeans in this corner of the world. So we have a very, very mixed up view of Latin America, and we need a better strategic view, regardless of who's president.
No, I think it's a good analysis you bring here in terms of a strategic view. And I believe now that when a new administration will come in, it's always an opportunity to review the situation, what has been done, and what are the challenges. And the challenges are going to be very, very important starting now next year, because Latin America will have to get back one way or another way. They will get back, and they will get back, but they will get back only also they can benefit from some advising from other countries in terms of, you know, how do you get back and how do you decrease inequality, and how do you bring your economy to become more productive, and finally to have to increase your living standards for everybody and to decrease informality. So there's a lot to be done, and I believe that based on the crisis, very deep crisis that Latin America faces today, Latin America also will have no choice than to look for new ways. They're all going to have to look for new ways. Right. And in that moment, then we can, you in particular, as a very important world economic power, and us, Switzerland, as a country which is very well respected all across in Latin America. We had a lot of migration from Switzerland there, and we have an economic footprint, which is quite important on investment everywhere. And therefore, we also have developed political and economic dialogues with most of the countries, which enable us to push through some messages.
By the way, the Swiss have a very, very, very superb ambassador in Argentina, who was the ambassador of Switzerland to Saudi Arabia when I was there. Yes. I don't know if he's watching this program.
Yes, he's listening. He's watching.
Oh, good. Well, he's a dear friend, and as you said, you know, you may be a very small country, but you carry a lot of weight in the world, and part of it is because you're independent in a way. I mean, Trump would love to have the United States be the Switzerland of the world in a way.
Yes.
So I think that
he would ever admit.
Pardon?
I don't think he would ever admit that.
Right. Well, you know, one point to what you were saying, Philippe, the vision, I think, for Biden, for example, with respect to Latin America, will be more engagement. Will be more engagement, involvement, more a more robust relationship with all these countries to try to, you know, achieve some sense of American priorities. For President Trump, I think there will be more engagement than there has been. I think he'll be freer to do more. It won't be the same, and it won't be on the same issues as Vice President Biden. But I think he will also be more engaged. And for example, I think that if Argentina, you mentioned you wanted to talk about Brazil and Argentina. Argentina, and you know more about this than I do, but I believe Argentina has requested some help from the IMF, and that decision has to be made. I'm fairly certain that a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency will support that, despite the fact that under Obama Biden, the relations with Argentina, in my view, were awful. Because this is when Christina Kirchner was
Yes.
president. Not very good. And they were aligning with Cuba and with Nicaragua and with Venezuela. And so that provoked a lot of antagonism there.
Yes.
I think things were much better. President Trump has a relationship with the previous president of Argentina, Macri. That's positive, and I think that's given him a positive view of Argentina. And I think Fernandez will do a better job of building that relationship with both administrations, regardless of who's in power.
No, I think you make a very important point here too. Looking at the US-Latin America relations, various countries, it also depends on these countries' relations among themselves. And you have Venezuela, you have Cuba, you have different composition of countries, which will have then also an impact on US relationship with some more important countries economically. Now, Tatiana, you said there were some questions coming in.
We have two questions, Philippe, Professor Westphal, that I would like to raise. Now, the first one was about Argentina. How would you define the actual political situation in Argentina? What would you expect to happen? Would you like to add anything to what you previously said?
Is that question for me?
Yes,
it
if
is
you like
to
to.
all of you, but probably to Professor Westphal above all, from Sergio Davidovitz.
Well, I think the situation is very, very tenuous. Economically, it's in terrible shape. It's certainly a country that, if it could reorganize itself and be able to move forward, has all the potential to do so, because it's a country of great resources, great people, but it is going through a very, very difficult time economically and politically as well. And the pandemic, of course, is any problems. I think either administration will be supportive of efforts to get Argentina going in a positive direction, and I think that's because they see the importance of Argentina not only in the region but around the world.
Yes, I also agree with what you say. Argentina has a great potential. I give you a short example. For instance, Argentina has now concluded an agreement with AstraZeneca to produce the vaccine that AstraZeneca is developing, a British company. And the first step will be done in Argentina, the antigen, and the second step will be done in Mexico, and they will supply all of Latin America except Brazil, which has its own also agreement with AstraZeneca. So this will be a great benefit for Argentina also in terms of technology. And this shows that, for instance, in the pharmaceutical industry, Argentina has a very high level. Now, what Argentina still need to do, they've got to get their house in order in terms of budget, in terms of subsidies, so that they get a macroeconomic sound situation, like Peru was able to do after the Garcia years, Alan Garcia. They came up within a couple of years, again, with a sound macroeconomic basis, which they've been keeping now for about 20, more than 20 years, just because they suffered so much from hyperinflation.
Yeah, but you know, this Latin spring that I mentioned earlier, this turmoil that's going on, especially, for example, if you look at Chile and what just happened with this vote yesterday. So they've decided that they want to replace the constitution with a new constitution, and they're now going to have a constituent assembly to do this. And in there they had two choices, one that was made up of already named politicians who were in the legislature, in the Congress, and then others elected, and they decided to make it all new. So it's going to be a group of people who may know very little about shaping a constitution for a country. In any case, the turmoil that has existed there, the turmoil that will continue, the pandemic, the economic situation, will likely put a damper on foreign investment into Chile as it will into many other countries.
Mm-hmm.
That is not something they can afford to have happen. And it's just going to be creating a worse and worse situation in those countries.
Yes, unfortunately. And in the short term, for investment will not go significantly because a lot of overcapacity. A lot of overcapacity, and it will take time to come back to potential output. Are there some other questions, Tatiana?
Yes, we have two questions from George Coble. The first one, dear all, may I have your opinion about clean industry policy, USA, Latin America? Is there a tendency to produce out of solar power, eventually hydrogen, to serve as a future energy source? That's the first question.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of interest in investing in solar technology, wind technology as well, particularly for countries where they have their challenge by energy costs because they themselves can't, Chile, for example, is a good example of that. They don't have any oil resources or anything else. There is a great interest in using the oceans to produce energy as well as the sun. Again, that's the kind of investment that's going to be needed in Latin America. I hope that it will go through. I hope that it'll move forward. It's hard for me to predict whether it'll happen or not. The central banks, and Philippe, again, you would know more about this than I do. I have some faith that the central banks in many of these countries will act very aggressively, such as our central bank has acted during our serious periods here with the recession. But again, you and Linda would know more about that than I do. Hopefully, with all of that interaction and some assistance from the United States to encourage U.S. business investment in those technologies would be helpful.
Yes, I think it is going definitely into that direction. Also, most of the companies now try year after year to save energy and also to have less waste and to produce more economically. So the trend is there. Now it really depends also on countries' policies. To which extent they may give some tax incentives or whatever to get that happening even faster. Okay, thank you. Tatiana, is there another question?
Yeah, there's one more question. How is the standpoint for a next USA administration on the Caribbean region to build up relations in terms of national security policy, especially these Caribbean nations who are dominated at the moment with the ALBA agreements?
Well, I think I know very little about this. I will say what I know, and what I know is that Vice President Biden has indicated a real desire to connect his strategy for Central America, as well as the Colombia strategy that he has, and particularly the Colombia strategy, to the Caribbean countries, and try to have a broader perspective on their future. But beyond that, I can't speak to it. I really don't know much. I don't know anything about President Trump's concerns about the Caribbean area.
Yeah, I may just add that ALBA was a group of countries sharing the same political views and also benefiting from the support from Venezuela for oil. But beside this, there were no particular common policies followed by ALBA. And now for some years, ALBA, we don't hear anymore about ALBA, and ALBA is not been anymore active. What we can see is that indeed now with the COVID-19, quite a few of these countries live on tourism. And now tourism and also cruise boats and all that now has been falling dramatically and may not pick up so quickly because we'll have to wait for the health situation really to improve, and it's not on the continent, it is worldwide. Therefore, it will be important also to have a policy covering the Caribbean, because you can't afford these countries getting bankrupt. And this is a risk. They are tiny, they have a small population, generally speaking, and they leave only a very few resources. But they are also at the back door of the United States. So therefore, it's in the interest of the United States that these countries can find their way. And there's always a way, there's always a way, there's a will, there is always a way. And certainly many things can then happen and be done. And sometimes things happen really when you are in great need, because then you have no more option, and you got to do it. And perhaps this huge crisis will also force some decisions to be also accepted, because there is no other way for the countries then to take a new start and look toward a better future.
Yeah, and outside of the ALBA issue, obviously the country, or let's say 2 islands that are going to pose a real set of issues for the United States are, of course, Cuba, and there'll be stark differences between Biden and Trump on that. Right now, Cuba has been, the source of the political campaign. In other words, trying to be attractive to Cubans in Miami and in Florida, because they're a voting power there, trying to be also attracted to Venezuelans who live in that region, Venezuela policy, who live in Florida. But I do think that Cuba, both Obama and Trump will treat Cuba in a very different way. Biden has already said he will go back to the approach that President Obama took, which he sees it as a way of basically, building a better relationship with the people of Cuba in order to change the government of Cuba.
Yes.
And perhaps he will use a similar kind of approach to Venezuela from the Trump approach. With respect to the other island that I was thinking about, which is not a separate country, it is a territory of the United States, is Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Where there are a lot of issues, and there's this statehood issue, and an island that needs a lot of support from the United States and has seen a lot of destruction because of the hurricanes.
Yes.
Can we take one more question?
Yeah, to be the last one, because then we will be finishing our webinar. Thank you, Tatiana. Last one.
That's anonymous. As a person that has been working close to the administrations the last 20 years, what is your view of the relationships of the United States and Paraguay?
Again, I think that I could not tell you where the Trump administration would fall in this relationship. I know that for the United States under President Obama, Paraguay actually was a very important country. Geographically, it sits between Bolivia, Argentina, and Brazil, of course. And as such, it is a critical place for also not only the security of the region, but for trade and commerce. All the questions about energy and pipelines and all of that got the attention of the Obama administration. Paraguay, of course, is a very small country. It doesn't get the attention that the big powers get. But under the Obama administration, I do remember it getting a lot more attention than it had under when I worked for President Bush or President Clinton.
And I could add that economically, Paraguay had one of the highest growth rates in Latin America now in the past 10 years. And they have been also very attractive for investments from Argentine farmers in order to do cattle ranching in Paraguay because of the policies. The being more favorable for cattle ranching and also for overall farming, so that Paraguay now is in the process of really moving forward and increasing living standards, also by adding in free zones manufacturing with assembly inputs coming from abroad and also from Brazil. So Paraguay, in the context of Brazil, with very high taxes and very complex regulations, is a country which has quite a good potential now to come forward. What they really need is to improve education. Great efforts should be done on education, and together with that on health. But the country has about 8 million people. It's very large in terms of size, so that I think they have some very good cards in their hands in order to move forward. They're also open. They would like to conclude free trade agreements with the European Union and also with us, Switzerland, and our EFTA partners. They see the advantages of open economies, and I believe that also in a future relationship with a new administration in the United States, or from President Trump, or from Joe Biden, that Paraguay will certainly be a country which will get some attention because of the perspective that they can offer.
You know, I do remember one personal experience from Paraguay when I was sent to Paraguay after the death of Stroessner, some years after, to work with the embassy there this was just on a short visit, but to emphasize the president's desire to ensure that Paraguay will not will not have a military coup or a military leader take over the country. We wanted to safeguard democracy there, and I think it was a successful effort. Not on my part. I'm not saying I was successful. I think our government was successful in helping that along.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, Tatiana, I think that we had a very good discussion with Joe. It was really a privilege to have you, Joe, here this evening here in Switzerland, only 1 week before the elections. But I think we have been able, through our discussion, to see a much better profile of the relationship between the United States and Latin America, what the US can expect, and also what Latin America can expect for the future. And whether it is Mr. Trump who is re-elected, or whether Mr. Joe Biden who becomes president, I think we can see that they are going to have very, very significant interrelationships and also actions on both sides, because there are many win-win situations between Latin America and the United States that will continue, and that both sides will be able to deepen and to move forward.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you very much, Linda. It's good to see you, and thank you for having me, and Philippe. It's very nice to be with you.
Thank you very much. Joe.
Before we close, let me just, Linda, you want to say something quickly?
Okay.
Linda, you want to say something before I close?
No, that's fine. Thank you so much again, Joe. We really appreciated it, and it was a great experience. Thank you.
We have a sign of appreciation from Ambassador Liliane Lebrun of Paraguay, and we have hello and congratulations from Ambassador Schellenberg from Argentina. So also from my side, thank you, Professor Westphal, for sharing your perspectives and expertise with us. And thank you, Philippe, for structuring this very dynamic dialogue. All our viewers, I hope you enjoyed this kind of fireside chat atmosphere and the insights we were lucky enough to have been offered today. Let me remind you that US Election Day is also the day of our next webinar, the Latin America Day, which will start at 2 p.m. Zurich time and finish around 5:10. We have prepared a sequence of sessions with top speakers and panelists. You can find the most recent program version on our website under events. Make sure to register and connect. Till then, all the best, stay safe, and hasta luego.
Yes.
Hasta luego.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.